I never thought a quiet suburban street could feel like a battlefield, until the day I realized danger wasn't always in the shadows. It came right to our driveway in broad daylight, with a man in a uniform who had no idea who he was about to confront. And the worst part? I couldn't protect my daughter the way most parents do, because she didn't need me to. It was a sunny Thursday morning, the kind where everything seems ordinary. Birds were chirping, sprinklers were running, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from my kitchen window. I watched from my porch as my daughter, Claire, pulled into the driveway in her government-issued SUV. She had that same calm, precise way of moving that always made me pause. People in our neighborhood often underestimated her because she was soft-spoken, with a gentle smile and quiet manners. But those who truly knew her, or should have, knew she was anything but ordinary. Claire had spent years in the FBI, rising to a tactical commander position in her late 30s. She trained teams, led operations, and faced threats most people couldn't even imagine. And yet here she was, parking her SUV in front of our house, carrying equipment for a personal project, completely unaware that this simple act would ignite a storm. I knew trouble was brewing the second I saw Karen across the street. If you've lived in a neighborhood with an HOA, you know the type. Karen was the queen of complaint letters, the self-appointed enforcer of invisible rules, and the resident who considered parking in the wrong spot a personal insult. She had her hair pulled back tight, sunglasses perched high on her forehead, and a phone in her hand, already dialing for backup before she even saw what was happening. Her lips moved, probably issuing orders no one else had asked for, and I felt a familiar pit form in my stomach. Claire didn't even notice Karen at first. She stepped out of her SUV, carrying a small case with that quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you can handle. I admired her every day, but in that moment my admiration came with fear. I knew Karen was capable of making a mountain out of a molehill, and I knew the HOA had a reputation for escalating things unnecessarily. Sure enough, within minutes, a man in a cheap uniform appeared at the end of our driveway. He called himself HOA security, but his posture screamed overcompensation rather than authority. His walk was deliberate, the kind that tries to look intimidating but comes across almost comical when you're not scared. Almost. Claire greeted him politely, nodding her head, but there was a subtle tension in her shoulders. She didn't raise her voice, didn't act defensive. She simply assessed him, like a general observing a new recruit. That was her way. She could size someone up in seconds and decide if they were a threat or just a nuisance. I, on the other hand, was frozen, gripping the railing of the porch, praying that this confrontation wouldn't spiral out of control. The guard cleared his throat, hands on his belt, and demanded to know why she was parking in a restricted zone. His tone was sharp, rehearsed, the kind of voice meant to assert dominance. Claire's calm response, simple, factual, measured, didn't faze him. If anything, it seemed to rile him up. I noticed his eyes flicker toward his hip, toward the weapon tucked under his jacket. My heart dropped. I had seen my daughter face life-or-death situations before, and I knew that calm, quiet patience in a trained operative is never passive. It's preparation. She stood there, shoulders squared, voice steady, waiting for him to make the first mistake. The tension between them grew like a storm cloud rising on the horizon. Every neighbor who peeked through blinds or cracked their doors could feel it. Something was about to happen, and no one, least of all Karen, realized just how outmatched they all were. Karen's shouts from across the street only made the air heavier. She was pointing, waving her hands and yelling about rules and violations, but the guard didn't notice her anymore. He was focused on Claire. He had no idea he was about to meet someone who had faced far worse than a neighborhood authority figure. And I realized in that moment that we were standing at the edge of a very dangerous line, one that could end badly if either side moved the wrong way. I wanted to run down and pull him away. I wanted to shout, "Stop!" But something in Claire's eyes told me to stay back. She didn't need my help. She had spent a lifetime preparing for moments like this. And yet, as I watched the first crack of tension spread like lightning through the street, I couldn't shake the fear that this ordinary neighborhood dispute was about to turn extraordinary. and terrifying, because on this sunny, quiet morning, the HOA had unknowingly brought a gun into our lives, and they had no idea that the person standing in front of it, the person they thought was just a quiet neighbor, was someone who could take control of a life-or-death situation with a single calm command. I took a deep breath, gripping the railing so tightly my knuckles turned white, and whispered to myself, please let this end without bloodshed. But I have a feeling it won't be that simple. The moment stretched. The air felt heavier than it should have on a sunny morning, each second vibrating with tension. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and steady in my ears, as Claire and the guard faced each other like two opposing forces about to collide. He cleared his throat again, his voice shaking just slightly, but he tried to cover it with authority. Step away from the vehicle. Now, show me your identification. Claire tilted her head, her eyes never leaving his, and spoke softly, measured, deliberate. I'm operating under federal authority. You are not authorized to stop me nor to escalate this situation. Please step back. The words were calm. Too calm, and it seemed to unsettle him even more. I could see the confusion in his eyes. He hadn't expected her to be anything other than another frustrated neighbor, an easy target for his self-important display of power. And he definitely hadn't expected her to know exactly how to control the situation without raising her voice, without panicking, without giving him an inch to justify his own aggression. Karen, of course, had gone completely overboard by this point. She was pacing across her front yard, phone still pressed to her ear, shouting about rules and violations, her words bouncing off the houses like a frantic echo. I could hear her repeating the same phrases over and over. This is a restricted zone. You have no right. She didn't see Claire as a human being, just a problem, an obstacle to her own sense of authority. But this wasn't going the way she wanted. The guard's hand twitched near his holster, and my stomach dropped. That single movement was a warning, a silent threat. I wanted to scream at him to stop, to think, to breathe, but I knew any sudden action on my part could make things worse. Claire remained still, almost statuesque, her eyes locked on him. I realized, with a mixture of awe and fear, that she had already calculated every possible outcome. Every second she stood there was part of her plan. You need to lower your weapon, she said finally, her voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable edge, the kind of tone that leaves no room for argument. Step away or I will be forced to respond. I felt a chill run down my spine. Respond? I had been through tense moments in my life, but I had never seen anyone hold a threat in the palm of their hand and make it feel like both a warning and a promise. My daughter didn't just speak. She commanded. And the guard, to his credit, or maybe ignorance, didn't realize that he had just stepped into a situation far beyond his training. The neighbors began to gather, peeking cautiously from behind curtains, doors, even rooftops. Some whispered to each other, pointing at the confrontation. A few snapped photos with their phones. Karen shrieked again, waving her arms and trying to make herself the center of attention. But Claire didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the chaos around her. She was like a rock in the middle of a storm, steady, immovable, dangerous if provoked. I wanted to step forward. I wanted to tell the guard that he had no idea who he was dealing with, but I knew that Claire had this under control. She had been trained to manage hostile situations, to de-escalate or escalate exactly when needed. My own fear mixed with pride. This was the daughter I had raised, the same girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares, now standing face to face with a man who could very easily make a terrible mistake. And then, just when I thought the tension couldn't get any worse, the guard did the unthinkable. His hand moved toward the gun, pulling it partially from his holster. My heart stopped. Time seemed to freeze. Every neighbor gasped. Every dog in the street barked. And I felt a physical ache in my chest. The kind that comes from realizing you might witness something irreversible. Claire's eyes narrowed, and her voice rang out again, louder this time, but still controlled. Sir, put the weapon down immediately. You are endangering yourself and everyone around you. Step back now. The words were not a request. They were a command. And I could see it. The first flicker of doubt in the guard's eyes. For a moment he hesitated. It was a small hesitation, but it told me everything. He didn't know what he had walked into. He didn't know that Claire could disarm him in a heartbeat if he made a wrong move. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The situation had escalated far beyond HOA rules and neighborly disputes. This was now life and death, but Claire had the upper hand. Karen, oblivious to the danger, continued shouting from across the street, completely unaware that her obsession with enforcing rules had created a tinderbox. The guard's hand trembled near his weapon, sweat forming at his brow, and I could feel the tension in my chest reach a breaking point. Every instinct screamed at me to act, but every instinct I had about my daughter screamed louder. Do not interfere. She's in control. I watched her shift slightly, her movements almost imperceptible, as if she was ready for the next moment, ready for him to make a mistake he couldn't take back. And I realized, with a sinking sense of awe, that whatever happened next, our quiet street would never feel the same. The HOA had just brought the wrong kind of conflict into our lives, and none of us would ever forget it because the calm before the storm, the fragile seconds, where a man with a gun faced a trained, tactical commander, was about to shatter. The moment the guard's hand fully touched the weapon, everything changed. The tension on the street thickened like fog, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I could feel every heartbeat in my ears, every instinct screaming that this wasn't just a neighborly dispute anymore. It was personal now, and it was about to become dangerous. Claire's eyes sharpened. I'd never seen that expression on her face outside of classified operations, a calm, lethal precision, the kind that makes time slow down and forces everyone else to make mistakes. "Step away," she said again, her voice low but icy. There was no room for debate, no room for hesitation. Every word carried authority, trained over decades of life or death situations. The guard froze, but only for a second. That second was enough to make me realize just how little control we had over what was about to happen. He was nervous, sweating and fumbling with his gun. The kind of nervous that comes from pride clashing with fear. But he wasn't thinking straight. Karen, of course, was oblivious, waving her arms, screaming about rules being broken as though that mattered at all anymore. Claire didn't flinch. She took one deliberate step forward, just enough to close the gap between them, but not enough to provoke him into firing. I wanted to shout, to run, to grab him before he made the worst mistake of his life, but I couldn't. Claire's presence commanded the situation. She didn't just confront him. She controlled the entire street with the way she moved, with the way she spoke, with the weight she carried in her stance. "Sir, I will not warn you again," Claire said. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge under it, a steel that made me shiver. "Lower the weapon or there will be consequences you are not prepared for." I saw him hesitate, and in that hesitation, a dangerous arrogance bubbled up. He thought he was the one in charge. He thought he could assert control by brandishing a firearm at a young woman who, in his eyes, should be compliant and intimidated. What he didn't know was that Claire had faced people much, much worse, people with real weapons, people trained to kill and live to see the end of it. Then it happened. The first mistake. The guard, in his panic and frustration, moved the gun a little too far forward. My heart froze. Neighbors gasped, some of them screaming now, realizing this wasn't a joke. My instinct screamed at me to dive forward, but Claire's hand was already moving, not fast but precise, with the kind of control that makes every motion count. "Stop!" I yelled instinctively, but it was too late. The guard's weapon wavered, the kind of trembling that signals panic. Claire's voice, calm but deadly, cut through the chaos. "Now!" And in that instant, he realized he was cornered. Not just by her presence, but by her expertise. The way she moved, the way she positioned herself, every inch calculated for defense and control, made him see the truth too late. His arrogance crumbled. The weapon dropped from his trembling hands, not because she touched it, not yet, but because he finally understood he had no idea what he had done. Karen's yelling grew louder, frantic, and I could see her shaking with the realization that she had invited chaos into her precious street. But the guard's gaze was locked on Claire now, a mix of fear, disbelief, and humiliation. He had underestimated her in every possible way, and now he had no control. Then came the twist that made my stomach sink. Just as I thought the danger had passed, a car door slammed across the street. Another HOA security officer, younger and less confident, appeared, and my heart leapt into my throat. This wasn't going to be over quietly. He was moving quickly, stepping into a position that blocked Claire's exit. I could see the tension in his posture. He had no idea who she was either. Claire's eyes flicked toward him for only a fraction of a second. And in that split-second glance, she calculated the threat, assessed the distance, and mentally positioned both men for maximum control without bloodshed. I could barely breathe watching her. Every neighbor watching from their windows must have felt it. The calm, terrifying competence of someone who had seen life-and-death situations countless times. And then Claire did something unexpected. Instead of escalating, she raised her hands slightly, not in surrender but in authority. She spoke again, this time louder, every word crisp and clear. "This ends now. Drop the weapon, step back, and leave, or I will take control in a way you are not prepared for." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The first guard stumbled backward, dropping to his knees in humiliation and fear. The second, frozen and confused, hesitated. Claire didn't flinch. She held the street, her presence alone commanding obedience. Karen, finally realizing that her obsession with power had nearly caused a tragedy, retreated behind her front door, phone still pressed to her ear, muttering about reporting and rules. I felt a mixture of relief and awe. Relief that the immediate danger had passed. Awe at my daughter, who had just stood face-to-face with armed men and controlled the situation without a single misstep. And yet, deep in my chest, I knew the danger wasn't over. The confrontation had escalated too far, the guard had been humiliated, and Karen's obsession had only grown. This was no longer a simple HOA dispute. This had become personal, and it was far from over. I stepped back onto the porch, trying to steady my trembling hands, my heart still hammering in my chest. Claire didn't look at me, didn't seek my comfort. She simply exhaled once, controlled, measured, and ready for whatever came next. I realized then that I had been a spectator in a battle I didn't understand, and that my daughter was in command, whether the neighborhood knew it or not. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, our quiet suburban street would never feel safe again. Just when I thought the immediate danger had passed, the world shifted in an instant. The guard's hands were shaking, his chest heaving, but instead of leaving, he froze in place, staring at Claire as if trying to memorize her face. I could see the arrogance draining from him, replaced by pure panic, and yet something in his expression told me he wasn't finished. He wasn't going to just walk away, not with his ego bruised, not with Karen egging him on from across the street. Then came the sound that made my blood run cold, the unmistakable click of a backup vehicle. I didn't need to see the uniform to know what it was. Another HOA security SUV, and this time it was moving fast. Two more men jumped out, their steps hurried, their hands already brushing over their belts. They had no idea who they were about to confront. And Claire, she didn't flinch. "Mom, stay back," she said almost casually, but her voice carried that authority that brooked no argument. I nodded, gripping the railing, heart pounding, because I knew this wasn't casual at all. She had dealt with worse situations hundreds of miles away, in places where lives were truly on the line. But this was different. This was home. This was personal. And now the stakes had just skyrocketed. The first guard, humiliated and panicked, made a sudden move, stepping toward Claire, trying to regain some semblance of control. I flinched, expecting chaos, but Claire reacted with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment 1,000 times. She shifted her weight, positioned herself between him and the new arrivals, and held her hands steady, calm, and deliberate. Every movement screamed, "I am in command. Do not underestimate me." Then the unthinkable happened. One of the backup guards reached for his radio, probably to call for instructions, and in the confusion, his foot caught on the curb. He stumbled, his gun clattering to the pavement. Time seemed to slow. My stomach lurched, and I could see the panic spreading like wildfire. Claire's eyes darted to the fallen weapon, then back to the men, and in that fraction of a second, she made a decision. She moved like lightning. Not recklessly, Not aggressively, but with the kind of precision that comes from years of tactical training. In one smooth motion, she disarmed the stumbling man, controlled his balance, and guided him to the ground without a single blow. I couldn't breathe. Every neighbor peeking out their windows gasped, some screaming. Karen's yelling turned into shrill, incomprehensible panic, like she had just realized the rules she lived by meant absolutely nothing in this moment. What is she?" Karen's voice cracked, almost a whisper now. But it wasn't just Karen. I could see every neighbor slowly understanding this wasn't just a confrontation. This was a woman who had faced real danger, who could neutralize threats we didn't even know existed. My chest swelled with pride and terror at the same time. This was my daughter, and yet watching her handle armed men in our driveway, I felt the sobering truth. The neighborhood, the HOA, even the law as we knew it, wasn't going to protect us if things escalated further. Claire didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to command attention. She looked at the original guard, the one who had drawn his gun, and the look in her eyes froze him completely. Not fear, not anger, but clarity. She communicated without words. Step back. This ends now, and then she did something I didn't expect. She reached into her coat, not for a weapon, but for her badge. She held it up, letting the sunlight glint off the metal. FBI, she said simply, letting the letters hang in the air like a warning. Every eye widened. The first guard's face went pale, the backup's jaw dropped, and Karen, well, I'm not sure anyone had ever seen her this speechless. I could feel a wave of tension wash over the street, heavier than before. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. It was about authority, power, and the consequences of underestimating someone trained to deal with real threats. And for the first time, I realized just how close we had come to disaster. If Claire hadn't been who she was, if she hadn't been ready, this could have ended in tragedy. The guards slowly raised their hands, stepping back, their pride shattered. Claire didn't move toward them. She didn't need to. Her presence, her words, her training, it was enough. And in that moment, the street felt transformed. The petty rules, the neighborly disputes, the endless complaints. All of it seemed suddenly trivial in the face of what had just unfolded. Karen finally retreated into her house, phone still pressed to her ear, muttering incomprehensibly. I watched her disappear, a mixture of relief and disbelief flooding me. But even as the immediate threat receded, I could feel it. This wasn't over. There would be consequences. There would be retaliation, gossip, perhaps even an HOA investigation. And somewhere deep inside me, I knew Claire hadn't finished setting things straight. She looked at me then, her expression softening just slightly, just enough for me to see the daughter I had raised. The girl who once hid under my bed after nightmares. The girl who had always been brave, but now was unstoppable. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice calm, almost normal, but carrying a weight that made me nod before I even thought. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "But what now?" Her eyes scanned the street, every corner, every potential threat. "Now? We wait," she said, almost casually. But I could see the storm in her mind, the calculations, the planning. We wait, and we make sure this never happens again. I realized then that our neighborhood would never be the same. The HOA thought they were in control, that rules and uniforms could dictate behavior. But today had proven them wrong. And I knew deep down that whatever came next, lawsuits, threats, gossip, it wouldn't matter. Claire had taken control, and nothing, not even fear, could shake that. The street was silent, but it wasn't peace. It was the calm after a storm that hadn't yet passed. My heart still pounded in my chest, and I could feel adrenaline coursing through my veins as I watched Claire stand there, unwavering, her presence commanding every eye, every thought, every movement around her. The guards had backed off, but I could see the tension in their bodies, the way fear had replaced their misplaced confidence. They didn't know how close they had come to disaster, and I was terrified that someone would try to prove themselves again before it was over. Then I saw it. The first guard, the one who had drawn his gun, shaking in place, trying to regain control, trying to salvage his bruised ego. You can't do this," he stammered. His voice cracked, as if he had just realized that authority wasn't a badge or a uniform. It was the person standing in front of him. And in that moment, my daughter didn't just step into authority, she radiated it. "Watch me," she said, and it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. He lunged suddenly like he thought aggression would fix his mistake. My stomach dropped. I was frozen on the porch, shouting in my head, praying he wouldn't make the wrong move. But Claire, she didn't flinch. She reacted faster than my mind could follow. In a movement so fluid it looked almost unreal, she grabbed his wrist, twisted it, and guided him to the ground with a controlled force that left him gasping. The gun clattered across the pavement, and I felt my knees weaken as every neighbor gasped, some of them covering their mouths in shock. Time seemed to stretch as she held him there, her eyes burning with a mix of authority and barely contained frustration. She wasn't angry, she was controlled. She was precise. And in that split second, I realized the full gravity of what had just happened. If she hadn't been trained, if she hadn't reacted with that calm, lethal precision, this confrontation could have ended in blood. Karen, who had been screaming nonstop, froze completely. Her face went pale as the truth sank in. She had been cheering on chaos, trying to enforce her rules, and now she was witnessing power in a way she never imagined. Her hands trembled, her phone slipping from her fingers as she stumbled backward into her house. The neighbors were whispering, pointing, some even recording. What had started as a petty HOA spat had escalated into something none of them could process. The backup guards, seeing their comrade on the ground, raised their hands slowly, hesitating before moving closer. Claire didn't allow them to approach recklessly. She stepped back, just enough to show she had full control, yet kept her focus sharp, her stance ready for anything. "Stay there," she said calmly, her words like steel. "No one moves until this is resolved." I couldn't look away. I felt a strange mixture of fear, pride, and awe all at once. This was my daughter, my Claire, who had once held my hand when I was sick, who had sat in my living room laughing at the smallest things, who had cried over heartbreaks I couldn't fix. And now she was the one holding absolute authority over men who had underestimated her, over a neighborhood that thought rules and uniforms meant power. And then it hit me. The emotional weight of what we'd just survived. I realized how fragile life really was, how quickly things could spiral out of control, and how little some people understood the danger they were inviting. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, not from fear this time, but from the pride and relief that Claire had protected herself, and all of us, without firing a shot. Finally, the first guard, humiliated, shaking, and completely aware of his mistake, muttered something incoherent. Claire didn't respond with anger. She simply nodded, signaling him to leave. Slowly, deliberately, he got to his feet and backed away, dragging the other guard with him. I could see the fear etched on their faces. They would never underestimate anyone again. And neither would Karen, I thought grimly, imagining her silent retreat behind her locked door. I finally exhaled, feeling the tension in my chest loosen slightly. The immediate danger had passed, but the street, the neighborhood, and the HOA had changed forever. Claire walked back toward me, her expression softening just enough to let me see the daughter I had always known beneath the tactical precision and authority. She placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked. Her voice was steady, calm, but I could hear the exhaustion hiding beneath it. "Yes," I said, voice trembling. "But what happens now?" Her eyes scanned the street, lingering on the scattered equipment, the crumpled uniforms, and the shocked neighbors. "Now," she said slowly, "we make sure they understand that threats don't work here. We make sure this never happens again." The weight of her words hit me. This wasn't just about one guard or one HOA dispute. It was about power, control, and respect. And Claire had just rewritten all the rules. As we walked back into the house, the neighbors slowly began to peek from behind curtains, whispering to each other, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The HOA had been humiliated, Karen had been silenced, and the guard had been exposed as dangerously unprepared. But the aftermath, emails, phone calls, gossip, and inevitable retaliation was already beginning to creep toward us. I knew the storm wasn't over. Yet as I looked at Claire, the woman who had single-handedly diffused a potentially deadly confrontation, I realized something powerful. This day, this terrifying and exhausting day, had proven something I had always known in my heart. My daughter was unstoppable. And no amount of fear, rules, or threats could change that. For the first time, I felt both terrified and safe. Terrified for what could have happened. Safe because Claire had faced it all and emerged in complete control. And in that moment, I knew the real challenge wasn't over. It was only beginning. The street was quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. It felt heavier, sharper, like the air itself had been changed by what had happened. The guards were gone. Karen had disappeared behind her locked door. The neighbors were slowly reappearing, whispering among themselves, some wide-eyed, some shaking their heads in disbelief. And I was standing on the porch, still trembling, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Claire came back toward me. Her movements measured, controlled, yet somehow lighter now, as if the tension she had carried for so long had finally lifted. I wanted to hug her, to tell her she had done something incredible. But I also knew that the day had left marks on all of us that wouldn't fade quickly. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw her not as the tactical commander or the hero of the moment, but as my daughter, the girl I had raised, the woman who had faced unimaginable danger and come out stronger. "They'll report us," I said quietly, still not fully able to calm my voice. "The HOA, Karen. They'll make this a thing." Claire shrugged, almost nonchalantly, but her eyes were sharp. "Let them. What they do now doesn't change what happened. We followed the law, we stayed calm, and we protected ourselves. That's all that matters." I swallowed hard, realizing she was right. The guard's ego, Karen's obsession, and the HOA's petty rules had all collided in a moment of pure chaos, but we had survived, unscathed, and with the truth on our side. There was something profoundly satisfying about that, a quiet victory that no amount of gossip or threats could erase. Over the next few hours, the fallout began to reveal itself. Calls were made. Emails were sent. The HOA had no choice but to acknowledge what had happened, though I knew their pride would never let them admit fault publicly. Karen stayed inside, avoiding every eye, her fury and embarrassment simmering silently. And the guards? They were placed on immediate leave, their incompetence and lack of training exposed. Claire had ensured it, quietly but firmly. As I watched all of this unfold, I realized how much had changed, not just for the neighborhood, but for us. Claire had always been brave, capable, and strong, but today she had shown a different kind of power, the kind that comes from control, patience, and an unwavering sense of authority. And I, her parent, had learned something just as important. I had learned that courage sometimes doesn't roar. Sometimes it stands still, calm and deliberate until the right moment. Later that evening, the sun dipped low, painting the street in shades of orange and gold. Claire and I sat on the porch, silent for a while, watching our neighbors retreat to their homes, probably reconsidering how they measured power and respect. For the first time that day, I felt the weight of relief settle over me. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I said softly. "I never thought our neighborhood could be dangerous like that." She shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You didn't see it because it's your role to worry. Mine is to act, and today I acted." I looked at her then, really looked, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not just my daughter, not just an FBI commander, but a woman who could take control of chaos and turn it into order. A woman who had proven to herself, and to everyone else, that true authority isn't about rules or guns or titles. It's about confidence, training, and moral clarity. I thought about the neighbors, the HOA, and even Karen. Their obsession with control, their inability to see beyond petty rules, had created the chaos. But it had also revealed the truth. Power without wisdom is dangerous. And courage without recognition can be invisible until it becomes necessary. By the time night fell, the neighborhood felt different. Not because the HOA had changed or Karen had learned humility, but because we had changed. Claire had reminded me of what it meant to be strong and brave, even in a world that underestimates you. I had witnessed it firsthand. And I knew I would never see my daughter the same way again. She wasn't just my child, she was a force, a protector, a living example of controlled power in a world full of chaos. I leaned back, letting the evening breeze wash over me, and I realized something profound. Life will always throw unexpected dangers in your path, sometimes in the most ordinary places. But it's not the dangers themselves that define us. It's how we respond to them. And sometimes the person who seems quiet, the one who doesn't call attention to themselves, is the one capable of extraordinary things when it truly matters. As I watched Claire gather her things and walk inside, I whispered softly to myself, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and love. Some people wait their whole lives to face a moment like this. She didn't wait. She owned it, and in that ownership I found a lasting lesson, not just about power, or fear, or courage, but about trust, control, and the extraordinary strength that can live quietly, waiting for the moment to shine.